Alors, on va parler ce matin un peu du nouveau programme d'anglais. Puis quand je dis parler, c'est parce qu'on va plus travailler ce matin que présenter. Alors, nous souhaitons profiter de l'occasion pour souligner le fait que les participants dans cette rencontre virtuelle se retrouvent sur les territoires des traités 6, 7 et 8, des lieux de rencontre et de déplacement traditionnels des Premières Nations, ainsi que sur les territoires des Métis en Alberta. Nous reconnaissons ces peuples comme gardiens traditionnels de ces territoires et nous leur rendons hommage. Ce moment de reconnaissance nous permet de leur témoigner notre respect, tout en nous engageant dans la voie d'une guérison collective et d'une véritable réconciliation. On honorera ensemble ces magnifiques terres de la province de l'Alberta. Le Consortium provincial francophone s'engage à accompagner notre communauté dans ce processus. Et comme j'ai dit, on va faire un petit tour de table. Ça va être nécessaire d'allumer les caméras aujourd'hui, d'allumer les micros, parce que ça va vraiment être un temps de travail ensemble. Je vais vous présenter quelques documents, quelques outils qui vont nous appuyer dans le processus de planification annuelle. Alors, je me présente, je suis Barbra Deskin. Je travaille actuellement pour le Conseil scolaire Franco-Sud. Je vis à Calgary, mais je suis en prêt de service au Consortium et j'adore ça. Je suis consultante et je fais parfois des ateliers comme ça, des présentations, surtout au sujet en ce moment du nouveau curriculum, mais aussi l'éducation pour la réconciliation. Je fais beaucoup d'accompagnement pour l'approche collaborative. Entre autres, j'écris des blogs pour vous aider à mieux comprendre et utiliser les outils, les ressources en lien avec ceci. Je me suis baignée beaucoup dans le monde de l'inclusion, donc j'ai quand même beaucoup de connaissances à ce niveau-là. J'aime aussi parler d'évaluation et Sylvie Gazet et moi, Sylvie Gazet qui est une enseignante du Franco-Sud, on est parti une série sur l'évaluation qu'on va peut-être continuer à l'automne. J'aurai du temps pour ce faire, puis je pense que ça serait une bonne idée, surtout face à ce nouveau curriculum. Alors, c'est un peu sur moi, mais je vais aussi vous demander vos noms, évidemment, vos écoles, et pourquoi vous aimez enseigner l'anglais. Donc, je vais répondre à cette question moi-même. Quand je suis venue ici à Calgary il y a 8 ans à peu près, j'ai commencé en enseignement au secondaire et ma tâche première, c'était enseigner l'anglais, ELA, au secondaire. Donc, j'avais une classe de 7e, 8e, 9e, toutes mélangées ensemble. J'ai vraiment adoré ça parce que ça m'a permis de toucher à plein de sujets en même temps que j'enseignais la langue. Alors, je pouvais mettre une certaine couleur là-dessus, parler beaucoup de notre projet UNESCO, d'introduire des romans intéressants. Et en même temps que j'enseignais l'anglais, j'avais aussi l'anglais langue seconde. Donc, les élèves qui ne parlaient pas beaucoup l'anglais. Donc, c'était intéressant de faire la différenciation à ce niveau-là et voir évoluer ces élèves. Donc, on s'est concentré beaucoup sur l'oral, puis ça prend à cet âge-là beaucoup de confiance pour pouvoir parler devant ses pairs en anglais quand c'est pas naturel. Mais aujourd'hui, on va traiter des tout petits en première année. Alors, on va commencer avec un de vous trois. Je vois Ashley, je vois Liz, puis je vois Monique devant mon écran. Alors, n'importe qui peut commencer. Je vous laisse la parole.
Bonjour, je suis Ashley de l'École Beau Soleil à Okotoks. J'enseigne ici environ 10 ans ou 11 ans, je crois. Et je suis le spécialiste d'anglais et d'éducation physique. Et j'adore enseigner les deux sujets. Présentement, je suis le spécialiste de l'élémentaire. Au début, je faisais tous les niveaux jusqu'à la 9e. Mais maintenant, on a un autre prof du secondaire. Et alors, j'aime beaucoup être avec les petits et ça me permet de lire plein d'histoires. Et j'ai 2 jeunes enfants aussi qui ont 4 ans et 8 ans. Donc, avec mes propres enfants, je suis toujours à la recherche des bons livres à partager avec eux. Et quand je trouve des bons livres ou une série que j'aime partager ça avec mes élèves. Et on peut enseigner plein de choses à travers des livres pour les petits.
En fait, tu as raison, Ashley.
Et les jeux. Et tout le monde aime l'anglais. C'est juste le fun. On lit les histoires, on joue les jeux. Alors, c'est pour ça que je suis tellement chanceuse. Les élèves adorent l'anglais, les élèves adorent l'éducation physique. Alors, je suis vraiment choyée de enseigner les 2 sujets préférés pour plusieurs.
Tu es l'enseignante préférée, c'est ça?
Hey, non, je ne dirais pas ça. Là, on a plein de bonnes enseignantes ici.
Ben oui, c'est ça, je connais bien l'école, puis bienvenue ce matin. Comme j'ai dit tantôt à Rock, il y a certaines écoles qui commencent avec la première année en anglais. Donc, je présume que c'est le cas pour tout le monde ici. Et on peut passer à soit Liz ou Monique.
Je peux aller, comme Ashley, je suis le spécialiste à l'école Beau Séjour. J'enseigne l'anglais 3, 4, 5, 6, puis toute l'éducation physique primaire. Alors, comme Ashley, j'adore parce que les enfants adorent venir en anglais et éduquer, ça c'est beaucoup de fun. Alors, j'ai pris cette session parce que c'était le seul temps dans mon horaire à prendre. Donc, je pense que je peux faire des connexions pour les 3e parce que je trouve que quand on enseigne 3e, c'est comme une primaire anyways. So, yeah, je pense que je peux faire, mais c'était le seul temps. Mais yeah, je fais 3, 4, 5, 6. Une autre raison que j'adore, c'est parce que je peux vraiment voir mes élèves évaluer pendant 4 ans. Je peux faire vraiment des relations, puis on voit comment ils grandissent. Puis ça, c'est vraiment le fun aussi. C'est ça.
Je suis contente que tu dises ça, Monique, parce que parfois, la tâche de spécialiste en anglais, c'est dur, c'est difficile, c'est lourd, parce que oui, on revoit nos élèves année après année, puis c'est pas toujours facile, surtout quand il y a un groupe difficile qui a des comportements difficiles ou dérangeants, mais de voir cette évolution, c'est vraiment magnifique.
Ils adorent ça. Je fais toujours un dossier, puis on place leur travail, puis on revue chaque année, puis ils voient leur main comment, oh, wow, ils voient qui est amélioré, et c'est oui, on va continuer là, ça c'est fun.
C'est merveilleux. Yeah. Et oui, je pense que la session de ce matin, même si tu enseignes à partir de la 3e année, ça va te servir quand même.
C'est ça que je pensais. Yeah.
Oui, certain, parce que je prends la même présentation. C'est très courte, la présentation. C'est vraiment le travail qui est important, comme je dis aujourd'hui. Alors, tous les documents dans cette présentation vont servir pour les autres niveaux. Donc, peu importe vraiment le niveau, on peut aller jusqu'au secondaire.
Parfait. Merci.
Monique. Et Liz?
So I am learning French.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I can speak in English. That's not a problem.
Yeah, well, and I work with people who English is their second language, and so I don't expect anybody to, Anyway, so I am teaching at École Rousseau from grades 1 to grade 12.
In Brooks?
In Brooks, yeah. Okay. And all of my classes are combined classes. So I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. And so that's a challenge. But also gives me opportunities to work with the kids who are a little behind.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be telling you. I tried.
No, I'm just asking everybody's name, which school you're from, and why you love teaching English.
Oh, why I love teaching English. I just love working with the kids. They are so curious and they are exploring language in 2 languages. And so having the depth of knowledge of language that the kids have at the school is exciting for me. It's different, and it's I've been able to teach at a deeper level than I would in a just English school.
That's wonderful, and that's been my experience as well in francophone schools. You can really delve into a lot of subjects, and when you see that they're learning in French and in English, right, 2 language courses at the same time, there's a lot of transfer that happens between the 2, and that's the magic here. And so we're going to consider that today as we go through some of these documents and we plan for the year, given that in many schools we don't start till grade 3 or even grade 1. So kids don't see English in kindergarten, but they often hear it outside of school, maybe even in the home. And so we're taking a lot of stuff into consideration. Ashley.
That's always what I find a little bit tricky, like, is your expectations, being a francophone, and, that like we do English in grade 1, but we don't focus so much on reading and writing. I do have them do some, but we don't focus on the evaluation. So then in grade 3, when I do start the evaluation, it's always like, well, how much should I expect? Should I expect them to be at grade 3 level already when I haven't, or should I expect them to be at grade 1 level? And I wish there was a little bit more clear guidance, exactly about what was expected in our conseil in that respect.
Is it all right with all of you if we're speaking English? I just want Liz to feel included in all the conversations. Okay, that's perfect. Just going forward, everything is in French in my presentation, but all the documents are in English.
We're bilingual and inclusive, so
we all teach English, right? So, but those are really good points, and hopefully today what you'll come out with is more clear guidance in how you can set up your planning from one year to the next, so that you, by the time they hit grade 4, where they're taking an English class the same amount of time in their schedule as their French class, as kids in English schools, that they're ready for that. We want them to be ready for that, but we know at the same time we can't cover the whole curriculum in grades 1 or 2 or even 3. So I calculated in grade 1, they spend about 1/3 of the time compared to the French class, compared to their English schools. In grade 2, it's about half the time. In grade 3, it's about 2/3 of the time. So given that, how can you possibly cover the full curriculum in each of those years to be ready for grade 4? So what I'd like to suggest today is that we focus a little bit on what exactly we're going to be teaching in a given year, and so that we can move from one year to the next, that our kids are prepared all the way through, and eventually by grade 4, 5, and 6. And also, how do we set it up so that it's a logical stream of consciousness from beginning to end? Or, we're going to focus on oral language at the beginning, that's for sure. How are we going to structure that? And then how can we make it so that we have enough resources at our disposition, games, like you said, books earlier. How can we bring that into our teaching? Now, you've all been teaching for some time, so you already have resources, you already have activities planned, lessons, you already have a lot in the scope of what you do. So I'm going to rely on that today to move forward, and hopefully we can also go ahead and start looking at what else we can add to the mix. I hope that works. And so, starting with the idea that we're at the end of the year and we feel completely submerged. I know that's how I feel, and I'm not even in a school. So I can just imagine, because I've been there, the feeling of being submerged. And on top of that, we add a new curriculum. We add a lot, you know, a lot of new stuff is coming our way, and I can barely make it to the end of the week. Is it only Tuesday today? Yes, it's only Tuesday today, but that's okay. Because as you notice from the image, there's the buoy de sauvetage, right? So I'm going to throw you a lifeline. And that's my goal today. My goal is to be here for you so that we can move forward together and that you're not feeling submerged, you're not feeling overwhelmed, and you feel ready already to start the next school year. Okay, so that's my goal. What I'd like to hear from you is what you expect from this session. I've heard a little bit already, but if there's anything you'd like to add, by all means, I'd like to know going forward, because that will help me tailor to your needs.
I think like what you mentioned, what should we teach, because we can't teach it all, and maybe touch on how, are the assessments going to change at all? Like, are they talking changing PATs or not, or what are they expecting that way?
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna put you on mute for a second. I've got a sick daughter here at home, and I can hear her coughing. Won't be. Okay, désolé. Sorry about that. Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, I see on the website that they've got letter name sound assessments for grade 1 that they expect us to do, to have some kind of record for with this curriculum. And so I'm wondering, I haven't been able to find that test. It says it's going to be provided for us by Education Alberta.
Yep. So at the start of this school year, we were given from Alberta Education the CC3 and NLSE. So the letter name sounds, that is available, and that will continue to become available to us, as well as the CC3. So those are 2 assessments that are provided for us. We can also search for more assessments along those lines if we so choose, but we're not obliged to, right? So those, like I said, that will be given to us. Are they the best assessments? I'm not 100% sure. I've had a quick look over them, and I know somebody in another conseil was working on doing their own assessment. So there's the possibility of asking to use other assessments in the place of, and that usually happens at the conseil level. But it's important to have those discussions and talk about that within our conseils, within the schools, to see what we have, what we can use, what we can ask to use. For example, with math, I know that this year, Franco Sud, we asked if we could use MIPI as an evaluation instead of, at certain levels only, instead of using the assessment that the government had sent to us. L'évaluation numérique. It was quite difficult for kindergarten grade 1. And so we did pass it in kindergarten grade 1, but in grades, starting from grade 2, I think we used MIPI. And so there is that possibility. And I wanted to throw that out there. The other thing that I'd also heard was in terms of the PATs, les tests de rendement, there's the possibility that will change and change very soon. If we're sticking with this curriculum, which it looks like for now, then they will have to eventually change the PATs, right? So are they going to put that into place next year? There's the possibility of not having any PATs next year in these certain subjects that are being introduced. So that's interesting to consider. Again, I'm still waiting to hear, so there's nothing definite where that's concerned. And we'd like to plan our evaluations, formative and summative, based on the curriculum that we're teaching. And we know in Francophone schools, like I said, we're not going to be teaching the entire thing. We can't. There's just no way. It's impossible in terms of the time that we have. And so given that that's the case, Francophone schools don't have that obligation to evaluate necessarily every single aspect that we're asked to go through in the curriculum and the program as it is. Okay, so I want to put your minds at ease for that. Ashley?
It would be just really nice to know early on, like in the year, September, October, kind of what the conseil is going to expect, like what the report card's going to look like. Am I going to have the same 8? Like that's one of the hard things about teaching English, is that you have 8 strands for each student to evaluate, which is like, it's so much easier evaluating social studies or gym, like there's one. And so if that's going to change, I really hope that they'll let us know, not just a month before report cards, or so that we have plenty of time to prepare and do the assessments we need, and do it properly. And I don't like flying by the seat of my pants, or I just it's a lot with the change. It's very sudden, and so I just hope that we'll be well prepared and know kind of what's expected for us to report on. And I really like what you're saying about having a clear plan for, because we can't do everything since we don't have the same time. So, and I like your idea for sort of if we can come up with like a year plan or something, and for all the grades, like that would be very helpful, because personally I find the year planning a very onerous task. When I do it properly, it really helps me throughout the year. And with a new curriculum, it's just really a lot to take on. And so that could be very helpful.
Yeah, but your experience will help in terms of what you normally do in terms of your year, right? How do you start the year? What do you like to start with? And as you progress through the year, that your students are able to handle more and more. What kind of group do you have in front of you? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And yes, my fingers are crossed that the report cards will be ready, because we need that absolutely to move forward. But barring that, because we don't have that control, right? That's the conseil that has to work on that. So we leave that in their hands, and we hope that they're going to provide us the support that we need with regard to that. We can just move forward on our own the way we're going to move forward, and hopefully today will help with that. And so if we move on, this is what I plan on doing with you today. I'm just going to briefly explain what scope and sequence is and what it means. I think you probably already know, but that's just a quick way to start, portée, séquence. Then I want to really delve into what is essential. What do these kids need to know? We're not going to start them off running when they haven't crawled yet, right? So les apprentissages essentiels, I have a document that I'll have up on my screen today, but that I will also share with you. And I've already highlighted things sort of to give us a starting point, but I'm going to change it all based on what we talk about today. What we decide, that's what I'll send you. And that's what I would suggest you follow with through the rest of the year. And then la planification annuelle. So I have another document that there's this wonderful educator in the United States. She has this blog and she puts together these amazing resources. And so I translated a bit of it, but the basis of it is really straightforward, and it gives us a good template to plan according to semesters, how many report cards we might have in brackets of like 6 weeks, and then by units and themes. So it's a really interesting set of documents that we'll go through together, and we'll make use of as well. So for us to start together and for you to move on your own to fill in as you wish. And lastly, what I'd like to work on is I'll throw some resources your way in terms of some interesting webinars that have come up recently, and that are upcoming still. And then I've created a board in New, Alberta, and I've done that with the idea that we'll enter into it today, and we'll try and flesh out using some learning outcomes, les résultats d'apprentissage, we'll flesh out some of the activities or lessons or things that we could do with our students based on those learning outcomes. That way you're leaving today with the beginning of an annual plan. You're leaving with ideas that may be new or that may just help you reorganize how you're going to spend the year. And knowing that, you know what, I'm just going to concentrate on this. So that's my plan for today. And I think we can manage getting through a good chunk of it, although we might not flesh it all out 100%. We'll at least have a skeleton to work with, and that'll help us move forward. Okay, so without further ado, when I refer to scope and sequence, it's really about the learning outcomes, right? So we're really going to focus on the learning outcomes. We will decide what, in what order, what logical order, what we're going to start with, what we're going to teach throughout the year based on the time we have with our students and the level. So when I say level, it's also taking into consideration the previous and the following. So they haven't had English yet if they're in grade 1, but they're going to have to go on to grade 2 and grade 3. So we really have to think about the scope and sequence of all the levels. And we want to decide what concepts associated with the learning outcomes that we're going to teach, in what logical order, also taking into consideration, like I mentioned before, the needs of our students, the particular dynamic of the group, what I like to teach. Right, so am I going to teach drama or poetry? Because maybe I can't do both. Maybe I can't do either one. You know, so there are going to be elements that are particular to me and what I like to do. So keep those in mind. And as we decide today what we would like the les apprentissages essentiels to be, what we would like the essential elements to be, keep in mind that you're not bound by it. Like I said, if you like to teach poetry and today we say, maybe poetry isn't something that we're really going to touch on, well, perhaps you're going to keep it and throw out something else. Okay, so these are propositions that I'm putting to you today that we'll put to each other, but that we're not really necessarily bound to. So just keeping that in mind. And given the context of our francophone schools, it's important to really teach the students 1 year after the next, based on, like I said, how much time we have and what they need to know for the following year and what they eventually need to know to cover the entire program. Because by the time they hit grade 6, they're doing the exact same PAT that anybody else in the province is doing. And what I've seen in my experience is that our students are totally capable of doing it, given less time and less resources. So imagine what we can do after spending this time together and really working out the organization of it all. I think you guys are going to be set 100%. Like I said, we're taking into consideration that we're teaching 1/3 of the time in grade 1. We also want to think about what they already know from French. So how much time do I really need to spend on phonological awareness or phonics or vocabulary or when they're getting a certain amount of things from the French that they could easily transfer. So let's keep that in mind. And like I said, we'll keep in mind the years to come. Okay, I'm going to backtrack a bit because I'm going to have us look at the year at a glance. So year at a glance, these are documents that were created by one of the consortia here in Alberta. I didn't translate it into French because we're dealing with the English curriculum. So when it came to the math and the phys ed and wellness courses, all these documents were translated, okay? But I kept them in English for obvious reasons. And when they created this document, they had it separated into 3 terms. Now, I know for Franco-Sud, there are 2 reporting sessions in the year. For Centre S, est-ce que c'est 2 ou c'est 3 bulletins par année? I don't remember. Il y en a 3. Okay. So what I can do for you, Monique, is I can send you a copy of this same thing, but separated in 3 terms. Perfect. Okay, I'm just going to take note of that. Monique, All right. And so given that this is what we've got, right? What's in the first two columns, what's in the like term one column versus the term two column, it's exactly the same thing. It's the entire curriculum, just, doubled, or in your case, Monique, you'll see it 3 times, okay? So when we do that, it's really and I'm just going to scroll down to show you what we're going to start by working on. Oh, okay, so when it comes to the first organizing idea, text forms and structure, well, maybe I'm not going to touch anything at all in the first term. Maybe I will. This is, like I said, a proposition to start. But okay, in term 2, I want to, touch on features that clarify and organize messages. So if you notice, the structure of the new curriculum is the organizing idea, the guiding question, the learning outcome, and under the learning outcome, we have the cusp, which is knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures. So here, all you see under learning outcome, the understanding is going to flow all the way through, right? So when I take that part out, basically what I'm doing is I'm really just focusing on what the students need to know and what they need to do. So it helps me with reporting. It helps me with assessment. So that's why you have these 2 columns here, and then the other understanding is just laid right on top, okay? And so let me just quickly go through to give you an idea of where I started highlighting. And you'll see in grade 1, I put a big emphasis on oral language. And even then, there are certain things, maybe, stories that are shared, oral traditions. Maybe I'd start that in the second half of the year. Maybe I wouldn't delve right into that. Maybe I would, though. Okay, it all depends. But at the same time, there are certain aspects that I'll see all year round. So you see, I start with listening and speaking skills, but of course, I'm going to have to continue to evaluate that, right? Because in grade 1, it's going to rest heavily on the oral language bit. It's going to rest heavily on teaching a lot of vocabulary, working on perhaps the beginnings of phonological awareness and phonics. They've looked at conscience phonologique or phonological awareness in kindergarten in French, so that they have a certain understanding and a certain transfer of skills that can happen there. Okay, so I'm going to get down to the phonological awareness. And I'm concerned that I think it's after vocabulary. So vocabulary is important. We need to give our students the tools right from the get-go in terms of, we want to get them speaking and understanding and using words that they may not be familiar with. So here's the phonological awareness, right? We want to teach kids the letter sounds. We want to get them into the into the reading, into the pre-writing stage, so that we can build on that year after year. Okay, so you get a sense of where I'm going with the work that has to be done with this particular document. Okay, so I'm going to start from the beginning. And if I'm not mistaken, there are 9 learning outcomes in grade 1. It starts with text forms and structures. It moves on to oral language, then we go to vocabulary, there's phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, writing, and conventions. Okay, those are all the organizing ideas broadly. And so the learning outcomes, like I said, fall right under the guiding question. And so when I consider that, and I'll show you the other document to help us with year-long planning, how that's set up as we move through the morning. This would be an example of planning by quarters. So if we're planning by quarters, we can pull out all the organizing ideas that we want to cover in that particular quarter. Okay. And if we don't want to use quarters, then we can move on to planning by 6-week stretches. All right. And past that, we'll look at planning by topic, by unit, by theme, by module, however we want to call it. So we can focus on certain concepts, the learning outcomes, the resources we may want to use, and particular notes, and keeping in mind that this is week by week. And if we have it week by week, we have to make time for rattrapage, so certain students who need to, revise more. We have to make time for working time, right? There's teaching time, there's working time. So it's a lot of stuff to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to go back to our document so that we can really decide what we want our students to do from beginning to end. What do we want to include? I don't know if you have access to the curriculum in front of you. If you do, that's even better. I like to use paper a lot and then highlight from there. So I'm listening to your ideas. Text forms and structures. Now here we're not talking necessarily about writing or reading necessarily, but there is that element of text. And keeping in mind also, I'm just going to jump to one organizing idea based on phonological awareness. We see that in kindergarten grade 1, but by the time we hit grade 2, it's still there in part. And by grade 3, if I'm not mistaken, it's not even there at all. Right? And that's not something we don't want there. That may be something we want to keep in grade 3, since if students are starting in grade 3 learning English, we want to give them those tools. Okay, so when we come back to grade 3, which I do in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to have that conversation, but I know, Monique, that's something that's going to interest you. Okay. So that's what I would do. Just so you know, in grade 3, I would add phonological awareness if it's the first year students are seeing English in a school. But for our purposes today, if I'm focused on grade 1, is there anything you might see in text forms and structures that you would cover either in term 1 or term 2 or both?
Which what outcome are you, like what outcome of text?
The first outcome is students examine ways that messages can be organized and presented for different purposes. That would be the first learning outcome.
So you could look at, I mean, like I'm always reading different kinds of stories and stuff. You could look at different types of texts, stories, newspaper article, although newspaper articles are harder to do these days because everything's online, but just try and show them a variety of texts, I suppose, through reading to them.
And that what I just covered, messages can be shared in a variety of forms, right? Books, stories, pictures, land even. So that can be highlighted for the first term. And then I think if you start it, it's something that ends up continuing. It's not the kind of thing that you start, you assess, and you move on, right? And then we can teach that we reprint from left to right. They may already know that. That would be a good thing. Reprint with accurate one-to-one word matching. I'm not going to highlight that. I would just highlight that one. We could even point out, maybe it'd be in the second half of the year, looking at sentences that start with a capital, that have spaces between words, that start and end with certain punctuation, start with capitals, end with a period. Right, something they can maybe start looking at in the second half of the year.
I do start that one before Christmas.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to add that one here.
Yeah.
And that's why we're working together. I'm not working in a silo. I don't want you to either.
Yeah.
Okay. And often when we tell stories, right, we point out the beginning, middle, and ending. Right.
Well, those concepts, I find you just roll that one all the way through grade 6, right? You're always re-going to that.
That's right, in French and in English, isn't that? Yep. Yeah. Perfect. And environmental print, including signs, symbols, and words, that's the kind of thing that's assessed in kindergarten in French. And even in English, if English is the dominant language of the child. So that is something that's already seen and already assessed and can continue. And here I'm pointing out things that really, they can be really detailed like this, something that doesn't take any time, something that's teachable in a moment rather than planned. So although we're highlighting it, we're not at the planning stage, we're just at the, let's pull out the essential items. And this is also interesting. Books and other forms of print are organized in specific ways, right? There's a cover, there's a title, there's an author, and we start that early on.
And again, these are things that you kind of see over and over and over because, well, and just because you teach it once, not everyone's going to catch it the first time. But again, like I read stories all year long, and you know, you're always discussing, oh, well, who's the author, who's the illustrator, what does that mean? And you know, you want to make predictions and stuff like that.
That's right. And that pops up a little bit later too. And the interesting thing here to keep in mind with the structure and the way it's set up is that we can decide, okay, I want my students to know this before Christmas, for example, or I'm going to give all my students all year long to master this concept. So that's also up to us, but also, you know, what comes out in the report card. So the next learning outcome we tackle is students examine ways that messages can be organized and presented for different purposes. Here I highlighted, for example, features of certain text and really focused more on titles and headings as opposed to color, font, and bolding. Are we there with them? Do I want to spend the time on that?
That's definitely something I would put in term one, like that's, you know, yeah.
No problem.
And those are basic. I find those are the skills that let's hope that in French it was being taught as well, right? Those are piggyback skills.
Well, yeah, these are things I never actually put into my planning because they're just things.
Yeah, you're hoping that the grade ones those are exactly the same skills they need to be learning reading anyway. So it's a piggyback situation there.
That's right. And that's perfect. If we can check it off our list, it's easy, it's done.
Yeah.
All the better. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that that's the train that we're taking. Our next learning outcome is students examine ways that messages can be organized and presented for different purposes. And here, the understanding is knowledge can be built and expanded by exploring stories and ideas that are fictional, that are imaginary, right? And so here we're looking at separating out the fiction from the nonfiction.
And I find that in grade 3, if I can just get that one done, I'm
I thought so.
Celebrating, because you have to teach everything, what a story is, characters, plot, all of that. So if I get that one done in grade 3, I'm celebrating, because then 4, 5, and 6, that's where we work on different type of texts, a news article, poetry, chat, all those other forms I get done in 4, 5, 6.
Yep. That sounds about right to me.
Yeah, because the story is huge.
It is. It's massive because it's the reading and the writing.
Yeah, and it's the base, right? It's character development. It's the setting. It's the plot development. It's very encompassing, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I find if I can get that in grade 3, I'm a hero.
Okay. So for grade 1, what do we want to be doing with this?
Yeah.
Oh, bless you.
I would think you would be starting with the base of like part of it.
I would think.
Yeah.
But how much and when?
Yeah. I would think maybe more the second semester. I find the first semester, it's reading.
Yep.
Phonics, what's letters, what's a word, what's a this, what's a that. And I find I top load my first term with reading, and then the second term I transfer and I top load into writing.
Yep.
And it seems to work.
Yeah, because the basis for writing is reading.
Right. You can't write till you've read. So
exactly, it's scaffolding.
yeah,
it's learning to run, learning to crawl and walk.
or you run, yeah. And then, like I said, you're constantly bringing in those other concepts for sure. But then like I said, I kind of top load that way. And then grade 4, 5, 6, it's more balanced, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
And there's the hope that you're not covering phonological awareness by the time you hit grade 4. But for some of our kids, we're there.
Yeah.
But here we're talking generally. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, now we're into the nonfiction, right? Students examine ways that messages can be organized and presented for different purposes. The same learning outcome, but messages here are nonfiction, right? Real information or ideas. And I know that when reading starts, a lot of kids, like my son in particular, he's a big nonfiction fan. And sometimes starting with those information texts and fleshing them out really sets them up for success with other types of text. So if I put that in the second part, then we're still good, because in grade 1, of course, we want to develop their reading at a more basic level. All right, now the next learning outcome takes us to students examine ways and messages can be organized and presented for different purposes, but poetry explores ideas. All right, so are we jumping into poetry at all? Some say yes, some say no. It's a tough one.
I'll do poetry just for the enjoyment of it, of hearing it. I'll add it to my whatever theme is. If we're doing a long vowel, and I'll do a poetry on that just to hear language. But I really then, it's in my program in 4, 5, 6.
And it rhyming.
Yeah, rhyming. I do that with Cat in the Hat. There's your short A, right?
Oh.
So you read Cat in the Hat, you're doing short A sounds. Now you got the rhyming going, and then I incorporate it in that way, not so much teaching that this is my poetry unit.
Yeah, and so I would personally leave this aside completely. Given that we have a third of the time with our students, I wouldn't touch poems, because if we're talking about rhyming, we're going to get into it in phonological awareness and phonics.
Well, and there's so many great children's books with rhymes in it that it's,
exactly.
If you read lots of books to them, you're going to have them all over.
Get it there.
Just talk about it. In fact, they'll point it out before you even do, probably.
Yeah, I agree.
And I didn't even know it, and it can go like that.
Yeah.
But it's teaching us the language in terms of the words, the sounds, as opposed to what poetry is meant to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not there yet. And
then by grade 5, 6, they have difficulty with it.
Yeah. And again, those are things that I often do. Like, I love reading books because you can teach so many things, whether intended or not. Mm-hmm. Often you'll just start talking about, like, just because you chose a certain book because it was a good book, and then you start talking about the words that rhyme, and then, are they in the same word family, or are they words that sound the same but are spelled differently? So you just have these conversations all the time without necessarily even planning it, or they just come up all the time.
Exactly. And at some point when you sit down with this, and perhaps when I share this with you, you may print it out and you may say, okay, now I'm going to sit down with it and I'm going to color code what needs to be planned, and color code in a different color what comes up naturally in everyday conversation. So the kind of thing I'll assess through observation and informal dialogue, as opposed to a formal assessment. So that's another way to use this particular document. Okay. And so now we're on to oral language. And I know it's going to take us some time to make our way through this, but I think this is probably the most important thing we're going to do today, because without this basis, planning for the year becomes difficult, because what am I teaching? So what am I teaching? And then when am I teaching it? We should be able to cover it all today. And like I said, I'm going to share the board I made with you, and I'm going to populate it, and you'll be allowed to populate it. It's like a shared drive almost. So hopefully you signed up for New Learn Alberta, and I'll be able to share it with you. All right, moving on to oral language, and our learning outcome is students develop listening and speaking skills through sharing stories and information. And this is interesting to me because this is where you can really integrate First Nations perspectives, right? Oral traditions, oral language, and I've put into the board actually a really nice little resource where it's a teacher using oral tradition and oral stories to really integrate the Indigenous perspective, but also just, you know, as a way of teaching. So I think it's wonderful, and I think it's something that could start right from the beginning of the year. Okay. And continue on, because there again, it's stories, stories, stories all year long. It's reading stories, it's talking about stories. It also gives students the opportunity, they've learned this in kindergarten, talking about themselves, right? And sharing who they are. And in doing so, it allows them to, you know, learn more from each other. And also listening and speaking skills. Of course, we want them to develop their listening and speaking skills. We want them to be able to learn that ability, that skill of, okay, this is what I do in a class. They've touched on it in kindergarten. So I think it's logical to put it here. But I've not highlighted necessarily everything. Listening and speaking skills can be developed through discussions, songs, poems, stories. Do we want to add dramatizations and presentations? Do we want to just tack that on in the second half of the year? I have a tendency to think, you know, if we're going to have them do like show and tells, things like that, that's a presentation. We can start early or we can push that off. That's up to you. But this is how I saw it when I first looked at it. And then moving on, students develop listening and speaking skills, again, through sharing stories and information. So listening involves maintaining attention. That's something we're gonna do all year. That's just there. Is it something we assess? Again, through observation. There can be little checklists. It's an interesting thing to assess. And verbal and nonverbal language, that they're going to start with that. If they don't have much English, it's going to be a lot of, you know, verbal and paraverbal. We're going to be using a lot of gestes. So messages can be shared through sounds and words, right? That's the basis of it all. Of course, they're going to get it from the start. They're going to get it all the way through. And then if we're moving on to vocabulary, right, we have to provide them with those tools to be able to interact. So vocabulary development includes learning tier 2 words. Now, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, whatever, I had never seen before that term, like tier 2 words. When I think about tiers, I think of inclusion. I think of, okay, you know, we have the palier, we have certain levels of you know, universal learning, more targeted and things like that. But on the New Learn Alberta site, there are resources that have to do with these lists of words. So they exist, but it's not necessarily written in stone. So you can have, somebody can have a list of tier 2 words, somebody can have another list of tier 2 words, but they're fairly similar. So tier 2 words are generally words that are not automatically known. They're not the usual sight words. So it's critical for comprehending new texts, useful, and can be encountered in the future. So are these things that we're going to start with and continue? Or are we going to look at them in the first term and not the second term? How do you want to play that one out?
I would maybe tend to think start more phonetically in the first term, like see the sounds and what letters go with what sounds, and then maybe in the second term go with the tier 2 that are more
unknown
sight words, I guess.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the analyze word formation and meaning. And if you'll permit me, I'm going to take a quick little break and be right back. Like I said, I've got a sick little girl. I won't be long. I'll let you look at this And
I'm just going to go make a coffee.
oh, perfect. Okay, so we'll take a mini break.
I was going to bring my computer, so.
Oh, there, you don't have to now. So we'll take a couple of minutes and we'll come right back. Merci, Roch. C'est bien beau. So,
Caffeinated and ready to focus.
fantastic. All right, so as we continue on with students analyzing word formation and meaning, if we're talking about the base words, is that something we're looking at covering it right from the start? I would think so. I highlighted it in the second term, but I think if, as you say, we're really learning about words and decoding them, then we're starting with that. Okay, and we're also looking at compound words in this particular part. Okay, and that's something that will continue because we don't expect our students to necessarily master this, so we'll give them to the end of the year. And then phonological awareness, again, this is cut up into several understandings, but the learning outcome is students manipulate sounds and words in oral language. Absolutely. A series of words or phrases that begin and end with the same sound. And I think, again, here we're looking at probably taking this across the whole school year. We would hope that they're mastering it earlier in the year, but we're going to give them the time that it takes. Again, rhyming, words that rhyme.
And for these, I have the game Pop for blends and Pop for word families.
Oh,
and I usually teach, introduce those concepts early in the year. And then that's a reward, for those who are finished their work early, or, if they're good, if they work really hard, you get some game time. And it's usually English games like that where, they'll play them all year long. And in fact, in grade 6, they're still asking me to play.
That's fantastic. And while we're in the oral language section, I think it's really important to use games as resources, right? We're going to talk a little bit about resources with the time that we have at the end. But games are important because there's so much to be done on that level, right? If we're talking about des jeux de société, like really games that they're sitting down and doing together, there's an exchange between them that's rather informal, but that has strictly to do with the game. They're learning the language through the game. And it's a lot of application of what they're learning. And I think it's fantastic. In fact, somebody at École de la Source, she teaches grade 4, she gave a 2-part presentation during the teachers conference, the PEDCA one, Marie-Josée. And that presentation was phenomenal because it really touched on this particular subject. And although it had to do with French and francisation, well, the same thing applies in English. It really, really does. So if you ever get a chance to, participate in her session again, that's a great one.
Is that Marie-Josée Fortin?
Marie-Josée Fortier, she's
Fortier, oui. Okay.
Yeah, that's Frédéric.
Frédéric, oui, okay, parfait.
All right, so as we continue on with our oral language, separating words into syllables or phonemes, right? Segmentation. Again, I'm just going to take that through to the end of the year because that is something they'll start at the beginning, but it's something that they probably won't master until later on in the year. Some of them will get that right away. Some of them will come in knowing how to read in English. Some of them will come in knowing how to write, but we have to go with, I think, what we're expecting the average student to do to be able to plan ahead. And then words can be formed by blending words, right? So 2 separate words can be blended to form a new word. Those are our compound words, blending sounds, all of that we're going to start working on right from the start. We'll continue. Again, we're going to be heavy in the oral, right? But if we can do that, if we can really create a good base in oral language, it sets them up so well for the reading and writing. And so that's something to be worked on. Students manipulate, so sounds can be added to the beginning, middle, or ending of words. So do we want them to see that more at the second half of the year? adding on to what they know? Or is it something they look at right from the start?
I tend to do it a little after Christmas,
Mm,
like the suffixes we're talking about, ing,
suffixes,
yeah,
prefixes.
yeah, I tend to do a little more after Christmas.
Okay, so we'll keep it there.
Well,
And
yeah.
yeah, and even then, it may be the type of thing that, given the time that we have with our grade 1 students, will it tack on to grade 2? It depends, right?
It depends on the group, and
Depends
4
on the-
months, 4 months just to learn phonics, short vowel, long vowels takes a long time.
It does. It does. I see my kids who are in grades 5 and 7. Sometimes they struggle with a bit of the English, right? Even though they're perfectly bilingual, they have a good basis in the oral language. But when it comes to adding on those different things and the short vowel sounds, the long vowels.
Well, and there's so many exceptions in the English language to add to all of that, right?
Yeah, we always say French is very complicated to learn, and I agree. However, English is the language of exceptions when it comes to the
French
written.
follows the rules, we don't.
We don't, exactly.
For every rule we have, we break it.
Yep, every single one.
Yeah.
So it is a more opaque language than French, is what I've come to understand. Okay, and as we move on to phonics, being the foundational literacy, is supported by understanding relationships between sounds in oral language and the letters that represent them, right? A big part of the beginnings of reading happen here. We match that with comprehension, with understanding, with decoding. So here we are, the alphabet consists of 26 letters. We're hoping they already know all of this stuff. But I would say we look at it at the beginning. We probably don't come back to it too much. We're hoping they're mastering it at the beginning. Many of these things, right? A relationship between the written letters and the sounds that they make. They've seen that in kindergarten with French. So hopefully this is really just some revision for them and getting to know the English sounds. Identifying short vowel sounds, long vowel sounds, the letter R, right? Some students don't master that until grade 3, right? So this takes some time. Okay, so of the stuff I have highlighted, what changes would you see? What would you add? What would you take? What would you change? In doing this, I was trying to scaffold it a bit.
Are the long and short vowel sounds also in grade 3, or is this really supposed to be done in grade 1? Because this is something that I am doing, like, because in grade 1, I'm told we're supposed to focus mostly on speaking and listening and stuff like that.
Yep.
So this is currently specifically more in my grade 3 program.
Yeah.
Like I have a spelling thing, like program that I follow, the Canadian spelling, whatever.
Yep.
And it talks about, the long U sound, the long A sound, the short, like all the, every lesson is sort of a short or long vowel sound and the silent E rule. And so I think I could continue doing that with this resource to cover these things, most of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I think I have a formation on the grade 3 another day, so maybe like, do I have to rearrange my my resources for my grade levels, or is that something that I guess I'll have to look and see if that comes back in grade 3.
Well, I'm looking at the grade 3 now, right, in phonics, and it's a short section, right? So phonics in grade 3, the learning outcome is students investigate how phonics connects to word formation and supports the processes of reading and writing.
Well, and I do it more as a spelling, you know, but of course spelling and phonics, that pretty much goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and then when we get to conventions, then we're strictly talking about spelling. There is a connection there, and that's what I see throughout the curriculum, right? Although I'm doing this here, the structure is great, but there's so much overlap between the organizing ideas that it's hard to separate it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary though, because I mean, like, as we've said, you know, people don't learn at the same rate or just because you've taught it once or whatever, you know.
Yep. So I see in grade 3, really consonant clusters blend 2 or 3 consonant sounds. Consonant clusters appear at the beginning and ending of words. Consonant digraphs are 2 consonant letters. Some consonant letters represent no sound, like the silent K and no, silent W and right. Chunking is a phonetic strategy. Connections can be made between phonemes and graphemes, and that is it. So it doesn't touch on, like, I don't see any of this in the grade 3 program. But if we don't do this, like if you're starting in grade 3, you're going to have to do this. Yeah. And so how much do we start in grade 1?
Oh, that's the tricky part, right?
Yeah, it is. And that's why we're meeting, and that's why I'm not doing this all by myself.
Well, and that's where the advantage comes if you have the same teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Some schools, I know they
right?
do, like some schools, they have the same teacher does English, French grade 1, and then they switch teacher grade 2, and then they switch teacher grade 3.
But imagine how disconnected that is.
Well, and that's where I find in our school, we've been doing it that I do 3, 4, 5, 6. So by grade 6, I've managed to cover all the curriculum and I have them at grade level. They're all at grade level by the end of grade 6. So, yep. But that's because I have the advantage of able to manipulate my curriculum to make sure that I'm getting it all done at one point in time and I don't have to overlap. I don't have September. I don't need to review. I know my kids. We go, right? I don't waste 3 weeks testing to see where they're at. I know where they're at. We go.
Yeah, that is the beauty of it. But in many
schools, beauty of it. Yeah. So
yeah, the enseignant titulaire will teach her French and her English.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of schools like that.
Yeah, and that's interesting in its own right? You know, you've taught them in French and what can be transferred to English, and you could see a progression across different subject areas, and you can use that in your teaching. However, again, when it's limited time dedicated to the English curriculum, then we have to make some important decisions. And this is where we're making them as a group. Now, again, it's no obligation, it's a proposition, and it's what you're going to do with it, knowing who you have in front of you and for how long.
And like said, that's where a lot of that piggybacking stuff, like, you know, understanding what the book is and want to get that done in French. And then I'm getting into that, like I said, I have to start with a grade 1 curriculum. So we're moving, right?
Yeah, you're moving, you're constantly go.
So a lot of that overlap stuff, I'm always in contact with the French teacher, making sure, okay, you've covered that, right? Because I'm not.
And that's important, that communication and that collaboration between the subjects is going to be important going forward. I think it's always been important, but it's even more important going forward here. So the relationship between the graphemes and the phonemes, do we even just want to push that to the second term, leave that there, see what, like all of it? We could do that. And that way this, we put aside, we're gonna touch on it anyway. We're going to hear those things, but then how are we going to formally introduce them? We'll do that a little later on. Maybe it'll even pop up more in grade 2. And here, fluency had me really stumped but from now on, I was stumped a little bit. So fluency is about reading, right? It's about, decoding it, but decoding it so that it's coming quickly. I can recognize my letters, my sounds, my words, my sentences, blah, blah, blah. I don't see them reading 125 high frequency words automatically, all of them. I don't see that as the average.
But with our conseil, we're not, see, that's where it's so tricky, is because we have such little time.
Mm-hmm.
We're not expected to really work on reading in grade 1.
In fact,
I've been told that it confuses them when they're trying to learn French, which I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not convinced of that, but at the same time, so that aside, there really is no time to dedicate to this. Yeah. If we're focused on the oral language, then I would take all of this out altogether.
Well, I think anything that has to do with reading and writing, we're going to do as much as we possibly can, just through things and across, but they're not, I've been told, because I've had this argument before about, wanting more English time, and no, you just have to do listening and speaking in English. Yeah. You don't have to worry about writing. This is the whole confusing part is,
you're going to introduce it anyway. It will be there. They'll be exposed to it, but we're also questioning what's going to be evaluated. What am I going to assess? What do they really need to know now versus, okay, I can put this off for a year or two because I don't have to.
And the reading and writing part is not assessed at all.
Right.
But again, if you want them to be prepared in grade 3, since it's not in the curriculum much in grade 3, you do kind of have to.
We have to get there eventually.
Do it, but not necessarily evaluate it, I think.
Right. And okay. And so, like I said earlier, when I share this document out with you, there's different color coding that can happen. So I can even start that now in terms of, okay, so if we're in fluency, I can highlight this in, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to do a light green. Okay, that way it's sort of in the background. Phrased reading sounds like spoken language. Here's where they're going to hear us reading, and we could bring attention to that, but they're not going to be necessarily doing these things. So if we have it out there in the background, that might be helpful. And here we're on to comprehension now. Comprehension for me can mean reading comprehension or oral comprehension, right? So I read to my son and he understands what I've read, but for him, perhaps decoding is really difficult. So if he was to sit down with the same text and read through it, he wouldn't understand the same text that I just read to him, right? So there's that complication that comes into play here. So my guess is that, again, here we're taking this part out and maybe doing this again. And that might be the case from here to almost the end of this whole curriculum.
So can I put something in here?
Please.
I have kind of offloaded this onto parents because a lot of my students have at least one parent who doesn't speak French or who wants to be involved. So I send home reading with the kids, a weekly reading program.
Yep.
And I have set up Raz Kids
and
home with them. And so I've kind of offloaded this onto parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I check throughout the year on their reading skills. But yeah, this is something that we don't do a lot of in class for grade 1, but they're still doing it. And parents are happy to be able to do something with their kid, the ones who don't speak French.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think that that's something that should be continued 100% because that's a support that can be done at home. Right, there's no teaching involved there. Yeah.
And the reality is that parents have to read with their kids at home or they will not be at grade level. And it's best to start in grade 1 again, because if you want your kid to be at level in grade 3, you should start reading in grade 1. And like the kids who are good readers and at grade level, guaranteed their parents practice with them at home. And sadly, the ones who are not up to grade level often come from defavorized, their parents might not have the time or whatever, who knows the reason. But basically, if you don't read at home, your kid's going to be behind, is what it boils down to.
Yeah. And yes, there are schools where, there may be little French at home, but it may not necessarily be English, the dominant language, right? And let's say, even if it is, are we talking about parents who are illiterate, who are coming from places that, well, they never went to school, really? So there are a lot of factors there to keep in mind, absolutely. But it's a reading program at home is a good basis and is something I would emphasize in the lower grades in English, because time is limited. We want them to reach the same level as English students in this province at some point with the limited time. So I'm going to highlight these sections in the lighter green, like I said, because it happens in some way, shape, or form, but not necessarily formally assessed. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah, and word solving, all these things, those are things that will continue to be worked on in grade 2 and in grade 3. Self-correcting, that kind of thing. And if there's anything in here at all that, oh, there's no way it's even happening in the background, let me know and it won't even become an issue, because I assume there will be things that they won't even touch upon. Like this, they're learning.
The words like the who, what, where, when, why.
Yeah.
What we were talking earlier about sight words, those would be good kind of sight words, because the silent W is or the tier 2 words or whatever they're called now, because those are kind of important words to know when reading texts, but don't necessarily follow the phonetics. Yeah.
But it's really keeping in mind those questions as you're reading through a text. Who's in the story? What's happening? Where are they? When is it? How do people feel? That kind of thing.
Okay, I see. The focus is just more on the comprehension.
More on the comprehension. Yeah, exactly. And here, writing. Well, would I even highlight this part in green?
In grade 1, I encourage, when I read a story, I'll often have, draw a picture, or, there's usually some sort of an activity to follow up. Mm-hmm. And I encourage the ones who are starting to write a few words to describe their picture or whatever. Those who can, I encourage them to, but it's not evaluated,
No, exactly. And so I would even say that, right, where it says processes that can be used to support writing messages include planning, writing, editing, sharing. They're not there. They won't even touch upon that, really. So I'm going to leave that part blank. It's the kind of thing that it's in the curriculum, but we're pulling it right out, because we can do that, right? If we were in English school and we're doing grade 1 right from the start, we've got enough minutes in the teaching of this course that we could potentially touch on all of that.
Well, and I think as teachers, we're naturally always trying to differentiate, right? Like we're pushing those who can, and who are done earlier. Oh, well, you try and write me a sentence to describe your picture, or,
Yeah. And that's going above and beyond the curriculum, right? That's pushing them further. And those students who are, let's say, in grade 3 and phonological awareness is a difficulty, well, we're trying to bring them up to speed too, even though it's not a part of the curriculum. So we're bookending it. We're really trying to get them all to a particular level. And like you said, pushing those who can be pushed and bringing those along, taking kids where they are. Okay, and again here, writing. We don't see that in grade 1. Tools to create messages, keyboarding, really, and that I know many schools only touch on that in grade 3, grade 2 maybe. Now, when it comes to conventions, here's my question. Are we talking about capitals, punctuation? How much grammar are we doing?
Honestly, for grade 1, it's capitals at the beginning of sentences, periods at the end, and that's it.
Okay.
I would say that's about it. Get to know your letters, learning to read left to right, capitals, periods, what's the sentence, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's mainly it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's what I thought too. So I'm going to put that throughout the year and leave it at that. We're not looking at declarative sentences, interrogative ones. Okay, maybe talk about the question mark, the exclamation mark, but I would leave it at that.
Well, and oftentimes, like, they'll have to just copy a sentence that I've written on the board. We might read a story, discuss, come up with an idea or an answer to a question. I'll write it on the board. They have to copy it. And of course, I'll be just walking around, seeing how they're doing and pointing out, oh, needs to start with a capital. Oh, where's your period?
Yep.
Again, it's just kind of stuff we do every day, right?
Yep. And that's it. That's the practice. Those are the skills, the drills that they're going to see and see and see and see until they've mastered it. And then, okay, let's move on to the next thing. Spelling patterns. So here we are with the spelling, vowel consonant, right? CVC, VC with the silent E. How much, if anything, are we covering here?
And this is just kind of what I'm questioning, it's like, how much should I do? And this is where I'm always very conflicted, because I want more time to teach English. And the Conseil that doesn't want to give us more. So this is what is the conflict for me is, how much should I be doing in the early grades? Because I'm basically told don't do any.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you have to kind of do some to set them up for grade 3,
So I'm going to highlight this section in the light green, okay? Because then it becomes, okay, if there's time, I'm going to do it. If I can squeeze it in there, if I can do parts of it, I will. If it can be in the background.
But like with spelling, I don't know, like it's not really something, I don't know. Like, can it be just squeezed in, or is it more of sort of something you should cover kind of regularly? I'm wondering.
But spelling is definitely something that should be covered regularly. However, because we're working with time constraints, because they're not really writing yet, because they're starting the reading.
Yeah, well, and I am focusing, like I'm doing more of the reading, and you want to keep it fun in those grades too. You want school to be fun and about fun stories and games, and so that they aren't turned off at an early age.
Yeah, exactly. And so my thinking is that when we're talking about spelling, if we want them to really work on it, it's going to be a more consistent thing we want them to work on. I'm going to leave that to maybe grade 2, grade 3.
Yeah,
even.
I think that's fair. I think that's good.
And so I'm going to leave it in the green because that allows us to at least say, okay, well, maybe some exposure, maybe it won't be consistent and it won't be assessed.
Well, and again, that's what we can do through games, right? Like it's not necessarily being assessed, but we're playing games. We're working on spelling through the spelling games and stuff like that. So that's at least an introduction. Yeah.
And then I would, this would be put aside for me, having personal word lists, working with dictionaries, and that to me is not a concept I would touch in grade 1. That brings us to the end of that entire document. I'm sharing this document with you. And like I said, Monique, I'll be sharing the document that has the 3 terms for you. And that way you can sort of decide, okay, this is what I'm doing at the beginning, the middle, and then the end. And so that takes me back to, okay, not necessarily the presentation, right? We've We've gone from there to, so those were our apprentissage essentiel. So the planning, right, that I mentioned earlier, because there's this new structure to our curriculum, it allows us to, as you saw, really pull out the concepts we want to cover and then decide, okay, so if I'm going to cover them in the first term only, or all year, or only in the second term, now I'm going to look at my year-long planning and maybe even start to consider themes and units. Okay, so in doing so, I'm going to go back to this document, which I'm going to, it's a template. It's as simple as that. We won't fill it in together, but I will share it with you so that you can fill it in at your leisure. But if I take us back to this example of planning by quarter, then what I did was I just put in the organizing ideas, right? The ones that will potentially touch. And this is something we can look at right now. How much time do we have? We don't have a ton of time, but this is something that I would suggest using the other document in order to fill in this part, right? So you've got the example here, but you also have this part that's clear for you to start writing in, right? So this document will be shared with all of you. And again, like I said, if you want to start filling in the bits so that you know, oh, I'm going to touch on this at this point, it'll be logical, it'll follow a particular sequence. This is how I like to do things. And then, like I said, you can also, or instead, use planning by 6-week periods. Some people prefer that. I'm the type that really likes to look at the really big picture. So planning by quarters works for me. I wouldn't necessarily do the by 6 weeks, but what I might put here is, okay, here are my themes. In the first 6 weeks of school, we look at, you know, the seasons. We look at, these are the themes I might cover in my first 6 weeks. So I might use it in that way. And when it comes to the planning for the year at a glance, considering the concepts and learning outcomes per week. So we take our bigger planning over the year, and then we start to, how does she put it? Sorry, I've translated this document, right? So I've only got the French words. Elle a commencé à répartir, c'est par semaine, the big ideas into weekly sessions. Always keeping in mind time for working, time for, you know, catching up and things like that. So this takes us for 9 weeks like that. And then it gives you some open-ended weeks, right? So it's really just a template that you can use as you wish. And then there are also, and like I said, this is a particularly interesting site. She teaches English language arts to middle school. And so there are even some lessons in there, and just the way she organizes things that are really very interesting. So I put those particular pages in link here. I couldn't embed it, but you'll definitely have those addresses to work with. And then, of course, the planning by unit or by theme. I love this because honestly, I love the different themes you can touch on, right? So although you're teaching, you know, reading, writing, spelling, listening, speaking, all of those things, what's the theme that might run throughout? And here I put question directrice. So I really pulled out of the curriculum the guiding question, because the guiding question really allows for planning for project-based learning. That's the part I liked. And I think that takes us to the end. It's a 30-day template using one guiding question. So you can use as many of those days as you need. Again, here her resources are there. And then that brings us to resources and ideas. And you'll have here a couple more links at the bottom in the notes part that I found. I was just looking for different activities, different things that could be used in an English language arts classroom. And then New Learn Alberta. So have you had the time to familiarize yourselves with this particular website? More or less? So when I log in, and I hope you've created your login accounts. If you haven't, I'll be able to tell right away when I go to try and share my board with you. But what I like about the New Learn Alberta site is I can use the curriculum within my board. So I'm going to go right to boards over here on the left. And this is the one I created for today. Okay. I've shared it out with somebody just to test because I started it in May. And so I separated this out. These are my board sections, right? I've got text forms and structures, oral language, vocabulary, and so on. And this is the example I have for you. So the learning outcome is students develop listening and speaking skills through sharing stories and information. So when you open it up, that particular section, you see the organizing idea, the guiding question, the learning outcome I just mentioned. You can see the different resources, all the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures associated with it. But as let me back up a little bit, hang on. I didn't want to see that. I wanted to see, so this was the resource I pulled out from New Learn Alberta, which touches on all these different learning outcomes by grade level. And so I can see the ones that it touches for grade 1. And if I want to access the resource, so it tells me a little bit about the resource here, what it is, what it's going to give me. It's 4K to 3. And then, so you see this video pop up, and it's about a half an hour, and she shares a story. She talks about oral tradition, but specifically referring to First Nations in her particular classroom. Because this is in a Wetaskiwin regional school, she's got a lot of students who are Indigenous and who understand where she's going with all of this she's talking about, but it's so rich in how she goes about it. So you can watch it. It's a resource for teachers. And then as I move on, if I'm talking about listening and speaking, I embedded this link to a website, 7 listening activities to get your students attentive and ready to learn. Again, this was just a little test I did. And here, you can find a ton of little activities to tackle certain skills. And that's it for that particular section, right? So that's what I pulled out. And that's how I use boards. And this is a board that I'm going to share with you so that, when it comes time to sitting down to find our resources, and we can spend a little bit of time on that now if you've got it. We talked about games. Ashley, you even mentioned, a game in particular you like to use. So when we think about the activities that we already have, we already use those resources, those tools, particular books, where would it fit in, right? So like I said, this board was really, it's a year-long board as far as I'm concerned. So if I were to choose, let's say vocabulary, right? My board here can include, here I'll have to modify, so I'll edit. And here I can add under vocabulary. Oops. I can add a lesson note. I can add different learning outcomes, but I've already added the learning outcome. I can add resources. Okay. So by doing so, if I add a lesson note, I can embed certain other resources. This one, the resources one, is where I can look for resources within New Learn Alberta, and it has a connection to the old Learn Alberta. That's where I found that particular video. So when I click on resources, there are resources that are out there for me. When I click on lesson note, and the difference between lesson note and private note is, let's say I go out to share this board, I can have a note that's just for me. And even if my board is shared, it's just for me and my class or my purposes. This lesson note is really there to put in whatever you want, right? So if I'm going to do lessons on vocabulary, I would put my notes here. If I want to embed outside resources, I can do it here, like I did with the last one. And so is there anything we'd like to share with each other today? And if not, like I said, I'm sharing this with you and we could populate it as time rolls on. Right.
I haven't created my new Learn Alberta account, but but I'd like it if you could share it. I'll try and do that in the near future. And
yeah, I'll show you how that works actually.
oh, okay.
So here, if I want to, is it through the edit? Sharing, okay. So if I were to take your email address, which is ashley.norheim@francophone, I'm going to try and share it, but it won't let me. You don't have your privileges yet. So as soon as you do sign up and I share it, then you'll get the email. I think you receive an email. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. Yeah.
So I have a question because I have an account that was given to me by the school.
Okay.
Do I have to sign up separately from that, or?
Good question. Look, I'm going to try and share it with you right now. And it works. So you have an account.
Okay.
And you saw the way I signed into my account. When I click on login, I click on Google instead of my like typing in my email address and a mot de passe, password, because I remember my passwords. So if I go to Google, it will, you know, automatically in my profile that I have, go to my Consortium account. So it's quick. So okay. Yes, you already have an account. I could share that with you. I could probably also share this with Monique. Oh, your email address is a bit different, Monique.
But where do I find it? Because I'm looking for the board.
Liz, I have a question for you.
Okay.
You say they created your account. So when you're logging in, what are you using as a login? Are you using your email?
Yeah, Liz Lobert at Franco Sud.
Okay, so that when she shares that with you, you should get an email in at that.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, check your
spam.
Oh, good.
It's in there, but you should get an email.
Yeah.
And if not, when you look at your boards, you should see them on the bottom of the board that she shared with you.
Yeah, like I'll show you the boards that I have access to are going to be very similar to the ones that you all have access to. So you see Isabelle Bujol, she's shared her math board with me. So I have access to that. But there's also all these boards that Alberta Education created, right? Like changed Y to I spelling pattern. There's a sample lesson plan there. There are a bunch of sample lesson plans that are there for us, right?
Yeah. It has me locked out of those. So I am signed up as a teacher. I've entered in my teacher ID. Yeah, maybe I.
It's frustrating, eh? Sometimes if somebody else does it for you.
How many accounts and passwords?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure how to help you with that, but there is a way to contact Alberta Ed down at the bottom. If you click on that without even having been logged in, there's often help that can be had there. But yeah, I want to make sure that you have access to this particular board. I'm going to be creating one for grade 2 and grade 3 as well. And for me, it's a matter of collaboration. It's a matter of, oh, let's just all put in there some ideas, some resources, things that I use, things that, you know, can be helpful, not just to me and my planning and organization, but to other people. I'm very much like that. I will share with everybody everything that I have.
Would you like us to add to it, or like, because sometimes you feel like you don't want to.
Oh, I would love
other people's documents, you know.
Mess with it all you want.
Absolutely. I mean, normally I'll make a copy before I make any changes to something that someone else shared with me.
And you can do that. You can copy a board, right, and make your own. That's just for you. But by all means, what I'm sharing with you is for you to have your hands in, right? So if I'm sharing this board with you, it's because if you're gonna, like, I'm inviting you to put stuff in there.
Okay. So should we make a copy of our own, or should we go ahead and?
You go ahead and play with this one.
Are you sending us each our own copy, or is it one that we're all in?
It's one that we're all in.
Okay.
Right. So for example, this board that you see here, the math one, is Isabelle Bujal's, but I have access to it. She shared it with me. It's the same one. I could make a copy for myself that I just keep for me, and I don't share what I put in it. But in this case, this is something, if I wanted to, if I found something interesting, I could go in there and I could enter it in its appropriate place. Because she did, similar to me, created sections according to learning outcomes.
And Barbara, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but when you do share, you can choose between collaborate and
lecture seulement, right?
Yeah, and that's where if Barb said collaborate, that means, you know what, she's opening that to whoever, well, whoever she shared it with, obviously.
That's right. So for example, I shared it with Année, but I gave her view access, not collaboration access. Liz now has collaboration access. And as soon as I, put in everybody else's email address, it'll be collaboration access that everybody will have. Because that for me, that's important. We've had 2 years where we haven't seen other people, except the people that we work, more closely with. In the past, we've often had opportunities to work together with our other grade levels or specialists. And we have less and less of that now, especially since subs are very, very hard to find. We understand the complications of it all. So what I want to provide to you is the capacity to still be able to share and collaborate together. So for me, boards is one of those ways, just like Google Drive is one of those ways to collaborate still. So for me today, it was important to make sure that everybody has something to leave with. And for me, the most important thing today was this document, because now I know, okay, what I have to teach. And if I'm walking away with also this document, well, I can fit in when I want to teach it in a logical sequence, something that makes sense for me. And then with this particular board, it allows me to add in the activities, the resources, and
the document with term 1, term 2 that we were working on, would you use that like as your annual plan?
You could.
That you give your direction, your principal?
You could
do more, like I tend to do more September, October, like more monthly. But I kind of like the idea of term 1 and term 2 because it's just more general. Like oftentimes when you break it down month by month, I don't know, you're kind of rushed because
I told my parents I was going to be teaching this.
Right? I hate that.
Home, I'm going to hear it. Yeah. So to me, maybe it depends on your principal and what the expectation is there. But if I see it term 1, term 2, that allows me a lot more flexibility to say, okay, I'm going to cover this. Not everybody likes to work that way. Some people like I need a month-to-month annual plan because it makes me stick to my plan. And I need to be organized in that way. But other people really prefer a larger, and with the languages, because there's so many aspects that I'm going to see every single day or every single week, well, I'm going to keep it large. So yes, this can be used. So when I share this out to you, I'm going to share it out to you in view only, and you make yourselves copies, right? That way you'll be able to play with it as you wish. In fact, you can even add a whole other column that says, okay, from September to November, I'm going to cover this. In November and December, it's going to be that, whatever, and change the colors of the highlighting, like I said, to indicate, okay, well, I'll cover this, but maybe not that. Right. So to me, this document is fantastic. And I see we're at 10:30-ish. And I just wanted to go back to the presentation to make sure that you also saw these are links, right? So the link to New Learn Alberta is there. The link to the Francophone Consortium for the different sessions that we have going on, but the SAPDC and ERLC, so all the consortia in Alberta are working on this exact same thing right now, and they all offer different workshops. So for example, I participated in 2 workshops given by Pearson already, and it's through the ERLC that I signed up for these workshops. One was on phonics, the other was on Spark. So Spark or online books, that could be an interesting resource for you. The next one is going to cover evaluation or assessment. And then there's one more, I can't remember what it covers. I signed up for all 4 of those, but they're Pearson resources, right? So they're trying to sell you something. I'm going to give you that caveat to start with. They're trying to sell you something, but these could be interesting resources for your teaching, right? So the one on phonics was a book, and they even had a scope and sequence list of words based on the phonics lessons that they have in the book. So it's really clé en main, right? It allows you to take that right into the classroom. So they can be really, really practical resources. I would suggest you sort of look through some of these. They could be interesting workshops as time moves on. And I know that next year, when we start the school year, we'll be looking more in depth at less the content and more how to teach it, right? So some conceptual understanding and how that works, looking at more in depth at resources and particularly assessment, right? In line with all of these learning outcomes. So for me, that's the goal next year: evaluation, resources, and the pedagogical approaches that we can put into place. Does that make sense? Okay. And I'm hoping that now at the end of the session, this is more how you're feeling, a little bit more, okay, I'm not as submerged with the new curriculum as I once thought I was. I'm more relaxed with everything that I've got in front of me. We've detailed what needs to be taught, and we sort of outlined when it should be taught. So all that to say, merci beaucoup, vraiment.